I'm here today with Ed Haddon, who is the founder of Haddon Coaching, the first coaching business in the UK to be B Corp-certified. After a stint as an elite athlete representing Great Britain in rowing, he spent the first 15 years of his career working with increasingly small companies. From the senior team at Asda via Anita Roddick at the Body Shop, he discovered a natural affinity with corporate rebels and has spent his life questioning and selectively rejecting societal definitions of success. And he's the author, you won't be surprised to hear, of The Modern Maverick: Why Writing Your Own Rules is Better for You, Your Work, and the World. So first of all, welcome to the show, Ed. It is lovely to have you here.
It's very nice to see you in this format, Alison. I'm looking forward to our chat enormously.
Good. Hope I don't let you down. Right. Well, tell us first. I mean, it's such a great title, isn't it? The Modern Maverick. Who is the Modern Maverick and why do they matter?
Yeah, I think the word maverick, everyone has an idea of the word maverick. A lot of people think about Tom Cruise straight away, but it goes.
I thought that was just me.
It creates a sense of sort of independent, living a little bit outside society, courageous. That's the sort of positive side. I guess there is also quite a negative side of rule breaker, slight maybe a loner, sort of gunslinging in a cowboy kind of way. And so I wanted to add that word modern to take the word forwards a bit, I guess, and say, look, I think we need at the moment mavericks. We need people, independent thought, courageous, wanting to do things differently, but we need to do that in service of others. So as opposed to a kind of lone cowboy cattle rustling or whatever image we have, or even actually the Tom Cruise arc across the two Top Guns, he does become a team player, doesn't he? He does become of service to others and saving Goose's son's life and all of this stuff. So it's trying to incorporate this idea that self-help, I think, might have in some ways gone a little bit wrong in terms of, look, just a little bit solipsistic, a little bit self-serving. Let's work on ourselves, but only really in service of others. So we can go back out into the world. We can help deal with some of the problems we're facing. And as the subtitle suggests, that's a win-win-win, right? We feel better, the people around us feel better, and the world benefits as well. So that's what I was aiming for.
And there is a huge and maybe slightly countercultural promise embodied in that subtitle, that actually when you write your own rules, that's not just better for you, it's better for the world. So just unpick that a little bit. For what, why is that true? What's your evidence?
Yeah, I think, look, I work a lot with entrepreneurs, and so I guess that's where I've seen this happen. And you said in the intro, this journey of mine through a sort of starting in big corporates and seeing people really, I felt quite hemmed in, sort of almost like guardians. Difference of views or extreme changes or ideas weren't often welcomed. And I think as I moved into smaller businesses and eventually started working with founders and entrepreneurs, I saw not only what they could achieve in terms of pace and in terms of failing, actually, this trying lots of things and failing and picking themselves up and going again, but I also saw what autonomy gave them. So I think this word autonomy is quite a key word in the book of, I believe we all on some level want to be in control of our own lives and our own destinies. And I think, a bit like a sort of battery hen, if you lose all of your autonomy, I think life can become really quite flat and dull. And also your talents, I think, can be really wasted. And the world needs our talents right now, So that was this idea of saying, look, let's look for autonomy. Let's not just accept this generic definition of success. I think you mentioned that in the intro. And that's really one of the first core ideas of the book is, let's start by actually thinking about what really matters to us, what really means something to us, rather than just accepting a definition from government, from our parents, from education. And that's this idea of what really matters to you. And then sort of writing your rules is, okay, well, what am I going to do with that?
And I know that you and I have talked, and it's very clear in the book, that sense that actually when you are doing the things that you care about, and when you are understanding why you're doing it, when you're really connected to your own purpose and your own sort of vision of what life can be, you're not only happier, you are more effective in the world. And that's a really, really powerful, I know. And as a coach, I imagine that's a very, very fulfilling role to play when you're unlocking that for someone.
Yeah, I think this is this sort of idea that I really this sort of triple bottom line, which is I sit in this intersection between coaching, business, and psychology, I guess, and I find this space very interesting because I do think there are things that we can borrow from business into life and vice versa, and that sort of win-win-win is actually something that comes out of the B Corp movement. You mentioned that also in the intro, which I'm very passionate about. It's quite interesting. I always sort of say, put up your hand if you've heard of the B Corp movement, and we're about half now in most audiences, which is great. But for those of your listeners that don't know, it's a movement that came out of the States that was trying to overturn really shareholder primacy. So this idea that sort of Reagan and Thatcher introduced towards the end of the 70s, early 80s of actually all you have to do as a director of a business is make money for shareholders, which is incredibly narrow. I mean, maybe it was necessary then, and maybe it was a good thing, this sort of growth boom of the 80s, but we know where it's got us now, which is great inequality and the sense of restlessness and the sense of unfairness. And so I thought, well, in business, we talk a lot about how do you balance shareholders, your team, the community, your suppliers, your customers. And I wondered what the equivalent is in life. And so that's this idea in the book of saying, look, your definition of success isn't just about work, however you define work. What about your health? What about your relationships?
Yeah.
What about what you're doing in your community? What about you as a parent? And I remember sitting with a client who came in sort of quite low, and it was quite early on in our working relationship. He said, "Oh, I just haven't really done what I wanted to do at work." And we sort of talked about his. And he said, "But I said, well, what's happening at home?" And he said, "Oh, I've got this wonderful relationship with my wife, and our kids are so happy, and everyone's flourishing." And I was like, "Well, that's amazing, right? That's success." And he's like, "No, that's what we all do, right? That's just a given." I'm like, no, it's not a given. And for him, that was a huge change in focus, I guess, a bit like a camera refocusing of saying, okay, so if we take a broader definition of success that isn't just putting our best energy into our work, but actually saying, what does success in my marriage look like? What does success in my friendships look like? What does success in how I can help with the climate crisis? What does success look across all these things that I face? It's a challenging word, success, and it has good and bad connotations. But I believe it's a very powerful and motivating word. I believe on some level we all want some measure of success, but we don't stop to think about what that is.
Right. And it's one of those things you can be talking about success and two people mean completely different things. It's one of those almost unhelpful words because it's so we think we know what it means, but of course it means different things to different people. And actually reframing what it means to you means everything because that changes how you live and what you.
It does, and it gives you the map. I think that's the sort of first. It won't surprise you to hear there are 3 stages in the 3 steps in the book. There's always 3 steps, but that's the first step. Really,
Trinitarian.
yeah, exactly. That's the first step, really, of saying it gives you the map. And it came from. It came. The book actually originated out of sort of 2 things that I couldn't get out of my head. One was when you hear someone say, "Oh, they've been really successful." And I was like, what do you really... I always said, what do you mean by that? And they said, oh, well, they've made lots of money. I'm like, yeah, but what's happening at home? What's happening in their head? What's their health like? So that was the first point. And the second sort of origin story of the book, if you like, was this book by a terminal care nurse called Bronnie Ware, who wrote The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I read those in a Guardian article, I think, in 2012. And I've still got them here on my... they're on my desk. And I think they're so powerful. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected on me, is the first one. And then this last one is, I wish I'd let myself be happier. And I could really see how you could get there. I could see how I could be on my deathbed saying those things. And I was like, well, how do I avoid that? What's the opposite? That's the regret. What's the kind of celebration? And that, Alison, is really where the book came from. And it's why the book is quite challenging and very broad. The book takes the whole package on, and you and I have talked about that over time about, broad versus narrow. And it was really important to me to try and write a book that was across all of life, and that broad definition of success, of really, I think, challenging and supporting people, actually, because a lot of people, I think, don't recognize that they've done great things at home or in their community or with their health or in their schools or whatever it is. We are very work focused and dominated.
And we also perhaps have an unhealthy tendency to absorb other people's metrics and focus on where we don't match up to those, or where we see people exceeding those, which I know you draw out in the book as well. Writing about this stuff isn't easy. It's incredibly personal, and these are big themes, and they reflect, as you say, conversations you've had over decades. What did you find most challenging about that?
It's interesting. I've just turned 50, and I remember I had a sort of gathering at home, and I remember when I was 40, I had a gathering at home, and my 2 or 3 closest friends, I had a whole wall full of post-it notes, which was the very early stage of the book. And my friends, it won't surprise you to hear, put up some unhelpful post-it notes to add to my
Did they find their way into the book yet?
I actually sent them a picture of them on my 50th. I sent them a picture when the book came out and say, "Hey, thanks, team. You know,
Thanks for that inspiration.
You really helped me there." So I think that's the first point, as you say, is this is it was a lot of cogitating, and you know that you've been so helpful on this book journey, and we could talk about that. But it was a long time, and there's some things really important to me as a trying to create coaching is a conversation, and it's real time and it's fully interactive. You know, how do you even begin to create that on a page which is 2-dimensional and fixed? And so that's one of the sort of first ideas of the book was, this is not a book that you just read, put down, and maybe think about for a bit. You know, the book has 50 exercises or tools in it. And I know, look, the temptation, I've read books where I don't do the exercises, and I say right at the beginning, I say, look, I know you're thinking right now, I don't want to do the exercises, and that's fine. But please try and do 1 or 2, because it does change the efficacy of what we're trying to do, the work we're trying to do here. So I think,
and the exercises, just as a by the by, make it extremely good exploratory writing prompts, I should just say.
Yeah,
so,
do carry on. There you go. And so I think that was something I wanted to try and do differently. We've talked about the challenge of the breadth of it, and I sort of stuck with that, despite lots of people probably quite rightly saying that, why don't you just pick one area, or why don't you pick, this idea? And I look, I think someone said to me really on the process, what do you want to say? What is it that bubbles away at you? And I think we've talked about that. We've talked about that, oh, he's so successful, or they're so successful. We've talked about the 5 regrets. And I wanted to create a positive sort of alternative to that, saying, look, here's a way of creating a life for yourself that you're really proud of, that you feel fulfilled in. And baked into that is you're going to be helping others, right? That's just a sort of a theme that runs through. And also, I think there's a positivity in me, and I think comes across in the book, of you can do this, and that really matters. This belief that, if I didn't believe in coaching, or I didn't believe in human potential, really, I wouldn't be doing this. And so that's what I think carries people through. And then the last point you said, which is interesting, is about it being quite personal. And I remember recording the audiobook, and you sit in a studio for 3 days, and it's quite intense. And you have this producer, Emma, she was absolutely brilliant. And so obviously you're very, you're going through line by line and reading it out. And she said to me afterwards, I produced a lot of self-help books, but yours is the first one that I've actually gone out and bought. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I said, what, why? And she said, look, I think the fact that you put quite a bit of yourself in the book, and there are some deeply personal stories and moments from my life, she said, it just makes the whole thing human, and it allows me to connect with you, and it gives me the sort of confidence and belief that everyone goes through really low points, right? Everyone struggles with this. It's a universal existential question, why am I here? Why? And I thought, I think she really hit on something there. I think she really hit on something that there's often not a lot of personal stories in some of these types of books, or even in non-fiction generally. And I think for me that felt like a strong way of connecting with the reader, and of giving them, not permission's the wrong word, but giving them a sense of optimism in a way that, look, I know I don't know exactly how you feel because that's unique, but I've got an idea of what sort of ballpark feeling you're in here, and I can't go on. I don't know how to do it. I'm really tired. How do I even begin to figure out what my purpose is? All of these questions that we all wrestle with, and I'm not presenting a set of answers. I'm presenting really a set of ideas and questions, and I hope inspiring stories and case studies that get people started. That's or when some people say to me, "What's success for the book look like to you?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, you're asking me my own question," and I actually write about it.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
meta.
exactly. I write about it in the book, and I'm like, "Oh, how's it selling?" And I'm like, "I don't know how it's selling." The world of publishing, it seems to go very quiet once your book comes out. But what I say to people is, look, when and this happened, you'll like this story, Alison, because I know you're a big runner. I've just taken a month off to run the Southwest Coast Path, which was an incredible experience. And one of the days so about
Wow.
half the time people came and joined me, and most of them had read the book. And the bit of the conversation that I loved most was, I'll take my cousin, for example, wonderful Nick, who said, "I've read your book, and I realised the next 5 years of my life are about being at home more with the kids and about turning down the volume on the growth of the business." And I was like, "Wow, that for me is success."
That's success for the book right
Exactly.
there. How interesting, how lovely. And it's a lovely microcosm in a sense of what you're talking about, isn't it? Because by putting in your own personal stories and understanding yourself better, that unlocks understanding and change for other people, which then you've got that effect right
Yeah,
there in the way that you've written
yeah,
the book and the way that people are reading it. That's
and I
really
think
exciting.
that's why the case studies are in there, because I know that not everyone will connect with me and my story. So by having, I think there's 15 or 20 case studies in there, my hope is that you connect with one, right? So one resonates, and you're like, okay, that's what they did. And I think that's, when you write a book that's broad ranging, I'm not expecting people to lap the whole thing up. I mean, it's quite a good book for dipping in and out of. It's a book I hope people will come back to. But I do know, I can hand on heart, Alison, and this is not a sort of boast. It's just, it's a deep sense of confidence. I know that everyone who reads the book will take something from it, and that feels terrific.
Yeah, I call that success. So, I always ask my guests, Ed, for their one best tip for someone who is just starting the process. I normally just leave it at that. I'm going to be slightly directive here because I think we've talked really powerfully about the big issues, the sort of the impulses, that what it is you're trying to achieve with the book. I want to go a little bit under the hood and get a bit more kind of down and dirty and technical. Tell us your tips for actually getting the damn thing written.
Well, it's a really yeah. I'd love to explore that. I mean, my first and number one tip, it won't surprise you to hear, is sign up with Alison Jones, because there is
Specifically the proposal challenge, wasn't it,
yeah,
that got this one
yeah.
sort of off the
We did
ground?
a couple of one-to-one sessions, and then you're right, we did the proposal challenge, and the proposal challenge followed by the boot camp. And I say this all the time to people, because isn't it amazing when a book comes out, the number of people who sort of come sidle up to you a bit sheepishly and say, who's your publisher? Can you introduce me to, or how do you get a book published?
How did you do
Yeah,
that?
exactly. Yeah. And actually, one sort of friend, who I won't give their name because it was an outrageous thing to say, said, "Oh, you've finally done something that I think is impressive." I was like, "Wow, okay."
Oh,
It's like, "Oh, okay, that says a lot about you." But we'll move on. On the edge of watching our kids play cricket, I think it was, or something. And so look, that is absolutely my number one, and of course it is, because I'm a coach, and so I know how we can get stuck, and I know how difficult it is in the work I do with sort of founders and with individuals looking to sort of figure out their purpose in their life. I know how hard that is to do on your own, and I think the writing thing, of course, it's an extremely solitary process, So that structure that you put around and that sort of impetus and the support you provided was absolutely invaluable. So that, I mean, we could stop right there, but I agree. Let's sort of dig down a bit. But that is anyone listening, and that's a complete no brainer for me. Is
I promise you, I am not
no,
pandering to these
no,
people.
no,
Okay,
no. She's
okay.
really not, and you will find me saying this on a train or wherever it is when someone says, "How did you do it?" What would I say after that? Look, they're linked, right? One of the things you really helped me with was getting over the whole imposter syndrome, and that's the biggest block we all have. Or who's going to read it, and who am I to write the book? I mean, it's funny when you say you're a life coach, you get two answers. One is, "Oh, can I sign up? I need a life coach." The other is, "Who are you? Who are you? What qualifies you to be a life coach?" And again, quite revealing of the two people who've given those answers. But I think that was what plagued me. If I really think about, apart from you providing sort of impetus, structure, accountability, and that let's come back to that because I think that's a really important one. The big thing you helped me with was just to get on with it. You have your subject. People will want to hear what you say, and I think the moment I switched the goal from that's right, I switched the goal. When you say I'm writing a book, I've written a book, the next two questions are who's your publisher and how many copies did you sell? And I think that is extremely unhelpful. And if we're thinking about this definition of success, that is the classic definition of a success of a book. How many copies did you sell? The breakthrough for me was switching from that and saying, and I remember I've said this quite a lot over the time, is to me, being a bit curious and interested in the process. I like trying new things, but to me, the definition of success was, I think it was when I submitted that first draft actually at the end of boot camp. To me, to get a book written actually and then edited and put into book format, whether that was published traditionally or self-published or frankly put in the drawer, which would have been a shame, or that was the definition of success. That because it's bloody difficult, right? And the number of people,
Yeah.
as we all know, who say, "Oh yes, I'm writing a book," or "I've got a book in me," or it is extremely. It's an ultra marathon. It's not a
Right.
sprint. And so I think the moment I became incredibly focused on that, with your help, obviously, but incredibly focused on that, and really not worrying or thinking too much about whether it was any good or not. Who am I to even judge if it's any good or not? Knowing I could get help with editing and readers, that changed, that freed, that loosened everything up, and I just started writing because I think the block is this constant judgment and criticism of the inner voice, isn't it? Is this any good? Who's going to read it? Who am I to write this? All of which is extremely effective at stopping you from writing. So I think change the definition of success.
And also, I guess, success evolves, doesn't it? And I'm thinking about that ultramarathon metaphor because it is such a good one. And of course, you don't start off in the first kilometre thinking about, well, I'm going to mix my things here, mile 32 or however long your ultra is. You think about the first stage and you think about getting to the first checkpoint, and and then there's the next one. And if you are overly obsessed with the end at the beginning, it can really work against you. You can feel very daunted
and I
very
think
quickly.
coming back to the Southwest Coast Path, that was 31 days in a row running roughly 22, 23 miles a day. And people said, and oh yeah, in between, during that you climb Everest 4 times, right? Because it's so up and down. So, and I think, I nearly, so many times I need to make it to the start line. A, because I got injured, but B, because people would just say to me, really people I really respected, people who'd done a lot of running, people who knew me, my coaching team, like Nancy is one of our brilliant coaches, just pulled me aside quietly and said, I think this is too much. Are you sure about this? And that's someone whose opinion I really respect and really caused me to. And they were doing exactly that. They were looking at the top line numbers. Whereas I was looking at, well, I know I can do one day. I've trained for that. I know I can get half through the second day. And people would say to me while I was doing it, how's it going? What are you thinking about? How's it going? And what I was thinking about was getting a good breakfast, stretching, starting,
Yes.
avoiding spraining my ankle because the path was so bad in places, remembering to look up occasionally because it was so beautiful, coming into the next B&B or pub, putting my recovery trousers on, drinking my recovery drink, having supper, going to sleep, and repeat, literally day by day. And I think that was that. The other actually, the other thing thinking about it that really unlocked it for me, and this was part, I think, of the proposal challenge or the boot camp you told me, was when you got us to write not just chapter headings, but basically paragraph headings. And in a way, that's what so I planned this run, right? 31, I knew exactly where I had to get to every day. I knew the distance every day, the elevation every day. And so I could just do that. I could turn when we turn our mind and body to one focused task, we literally, I know it's a cliche, but we can do anything. I'm not a runner. I'm 6'7" and over 90 kilos. I've never done a marathon before. But I think, yeah, for me, it's the prep and the structuring and the breaking down into chunks. So, I would just sit down and say, right, I'm going to do 2 hours, and I've got to do 3 paragraphs or whatever. That was the big unlock. Actually, was writing to a structure. Maybe that doesn't work for everyone, but for me, it was absolutely valuable.
It's such a brilliant illustration of it. And then when you've written your paragraphs, you put your recovery trousers on and you have your dinner and you get, yes, I love that.
and it's done and it's out of your head, and then you do it again the next day.
Again the next day. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I would say is it's the only time, Alison, I've ever broken my own rules of sort of working early in the morning or at the weekends, because I don't know, there were bits of it I loved. When you're and I think particularly your first book, where it's sort of everything, it's everything you've been thinking about, as you say, for 20 or 30 years, and probably too much. I probably should have, something, come and split it into 2 books or whatever. But it was a pleasure when the words were coming, because you've been thinking about it for so long and over time.
So every now and again, you need to look up when you're writing, just appreciate the view.
Yeah, and also that was. I mean, I had a lovely running. There's a lot of coaches in my life, as you can probably imagine. But he would send me the weekly numbers, at the end on Sunday. And actually, I had this wonderful sort of WhatsApp group with a few friends. In fact, the support group, and he'd post the numbers on Sunday, and you sort of go, "What? Just I've just
how?
How have I just run 300 kilometers and whatever it is?" Or so I think that's the other thing is once you. And this is like with the book, you don't. Once you actually sort of, once you've got it, and I always remember that when you have it in your hands, you're like, how did I actually write those 60,000 or the 100,000 that got trimmed and cut, and edited? Because that is the other thing I would say is be ready for full summits, right? I mean, there are so many full summits, and that point of, your first draft is a brilliant moment. But it's probably, I mean, you'll know better than I will, 30% of the way.
It's not the finish line.
Maybe a third, and there's a third of editing and a third of promoting it. And that's
I remember being at mile 20 of a marathon. I was supporting, and somebody said, "What mile is this? Mile 20? Oh, halfway then." it's exactly what it feels like, isn't it? The last 6 miles ago. Right. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. What's your recommendation, Ed? Because I always ask guests to recommend a book, and I'm really fascinated to hear what you'll.
Yeah, I've really thought about this, and I'm actually recommending. I'm not sure it would traditionally be called a business book, but I think it's a brilliant business book. It's a book called.
That's fine.
It's a book called Rapport, and it's written by Emily and Lawrence Allison. So it's a husband and wife team, and they are forensic psychologists. And they spend their time negotiating with basically kidnappers, hijackers, terrorists. And so they have written this incredible book about communication, about listening. And I tell you, there's a passage in there that really changed my life, which it describes a conversation where you're having to tell your dad, who is in his 80s, that he needs to give up his driving license. Now, this is what you would call a difficult conversation. And they give these 2 examples. They give the example of how exactly the conversation I would have had, which was a car crash, no pun intended. You sort of, you wouldn't think about it. You go straight in, and you try and do it in a one conversation. You wouldn't really be listening. you'd put them into a corner. It would get quite aggressive, So, and then they obviously go through some of their principles, and then they illustrate the conversation a second time, done from a position of obviously great empathy and great listening. And it was so powerful and so real. I think a lot of what I do with clients is help them think about and prepare for difficult conversations. I think a lot of us are conflict avoiders. And maybe sometimes those who aren't are kind of conflict creators or conflict sort of overriders, So I think if you're not slightly conflict avoidant, there's something that's interesting. Bit curious about that. And
maybe you need to think about
that. Yeah, exactly. It's like when a client comes in and says, "I'm very self-aware," I'm like, "Here we go." It's just not possible to say I'm very self-aware. So I think, and I think one of the hardest things, in a family, in a friendship, in a business context, is approaching those difficult conversations with grace. And you can really mess them up, and that you can cause untold damage and hurt. And in a business context, I think we put our heads in the sand, and that's terrible too. So to me, the art of communication, I say it, I think at the start of the section, there's a section on sort of relationships and other people in the book. And I sort of say, look, without communication, there is no relation, right? There is no relationship. And so I think this book is a sort of 101 on really great, effective, brave, but kind communication.
It sounds amazing. I don't know it, so I'm going to seek it out. But also I noticed that tactic, the way that you can show something and then explore why that was so awful, set out some principles, and then revisit it and do it differently. That's a great business book writing tool to have in your kit.
Particularly an audiobook where you're hearing the conversation. It was very, I was driving and I stopped. I remember I stopped, rewound, when that's something's good happening, you pull over, rewound the whole chapter and right, and then I rang my wife and said, you've got to, here's the link. You've got to listen to this. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry I've been so bad over the last.
I don't care what you're doing. Stop it. Listen to this book.
Exactly. And she talks about this incredible policewoman in the States who was 5'2" and just turning up at this situation with gunfire and a very difficult situation. And she talks about the conversation, how to enter that situation and the conversation, the words you use to de-escalate it. And so I figured, wow, if they can do that, then we can handle the. And it was actually, related. It was actually coming back to Anita Roddick, who I was a huge fan of. You go into her office and she had all these wonderful sayings. Actually, it wasn't even the office. It was in reception of the Body Shop. This quote right behind the reception saying, "What was it? Show me anyone who can decide which of the 7-year-olds has the last sweet, and that is a negotiator. That is a leader." That was so good, right? Anyway. So yeah, I'd highly recommend
Love that. Great, thank you. And Ed, if people want to find out more about you, more about Haddon Coaching, more about the Modern Maverick, where should they go?
Yeah, so there's a website, themodernmaverick.com, which has everything on. We're running a retreat in October, which is really exciting. So there's a couple of places left on that. HaddonCoaching.com is where the coaching work goes on, or we're sort of quite active on both of those on LinkedIn. So those are probably the best ways of looking up or getting hold of us.
Brilliant. Well, I'll collate a few links together and put them up on the show notes at extraordinarybusinessbooks.com. And thank you for your time today, Ed. It has been, as I knew it would be, an absolute joy.
Such a pleasure. Yeah. Speak soon, Alison. Bye.